Hi, Jillian. Welcome to When I Grow Up.
Well, it's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
In preparation for this conversation, I had such a nice trip down memory lane to try and see, what was that first engagements that we had in Cape Town about a decade ago. You had this conversation at the UCT Graduate School of Business around troublemaking and change, not long after you've launched your memoir, Shame Confessions of an Aid Worker in Africa. And at that time, we had Issy on Brie, the coffee shop. And so following that event, you had a couple of the troublemaker sessions there. And so it was just such a joy for me to be able to have this conversation and to learn from you how your thinking, the movement, and your work has developed since then.
Right back at you. I mean, when we rediscovered each other, and I was also brought back down memory lane to the journey that I've walked in my own work. And I feel like I have been evolving. My thinking about it has been evolving. And I guess some of what I've been looking for is how to most easily sort of help people access their own capability to make change in their lives. And that's sort of where, as we'll discuss in a few minutes, permission comes from. But yeah, it's really a thrill to reconnect with you and to connect the dots in some ways of what's occurred over the last decade, both for you and for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe that's actually a great place to start. If you can tell us a little bit about your journey. So you've had such an interesting one.
So I'm American by birth and, had a fairly traditional, conventional suburban upbringing, did all the right things, got straight A's, was supposed to go to law school, went to a good university. It was the early 90s. And, I had this straight path towards kind of suburban success and comfort in front of me. And I started to get interested about what was happening in South Africa at the time, which was the transition from apartheid to democracy. I also started to kind of, for reasons that I can't explain, question sort of what I wanted from my life and what I wanted to be a part of, what I wanted to contribute to making. And, in a super sort of idealistic young way, I was like, I want to go to South Africa. I want to be witness to that change process. I want to be a part of it if I can. So much to my parents' horror, I set off. I found an internship at a legal aid NGO here in South Africa and managed to get myself to South Africa in 1993. And that sort of started my own journey, if you will, around how to make change. What role did I have in helping other people make change? And I think at the time I thought, well, I'll go and be helpful. I didn't exactly know how, but I was sort of young enough and idealistic enough and perhaps egotistical enough to believe that my presence itself would be of use to people. And so, I kind of went from this very bright-eyed young woman thinking she'd go and help South Africa to transition to democracy to deciding that I was not leaving this country once the elections were over because there was something really exciting going on here and I wanted to be a part of it. So I got a job with an American nonprofit organization that was all about helping local NGOs to kind of get stronger. And that was the start of my work in organizational change, leadership, growth. It was really me over a period of years stepping into the role of change agent and frankly feeling more and more of a failure because I started to realize how hard it was to help people make change. And you could have all the resources in the world, you could have all the tools in the world, all the money in the world. And I was working for very, very, well-funded projects. And yet we kept coming up against this resistance to change. And I think if you talk about sort of milestones that I can remember, and I talk about this in my first book, is working on HIV/AIDS in Zimbabwe, which, was the greatest education in human behavior change I could have ever had because, here was the world's largest HIV/AIDS epidemic. We had lots of money to help people fight it. And we were really struggling. And I was personally struggling because it was so much more complex than I think we knew how to deal with. It was a very complex combination of culture and tradition and, beliefs around gender and beliefs around religion. And it was a really complicated situation to try and get involved in. And I personally sort of realized that I could give people anything they wanted to help them change, but I couldn't give them permission. And that is really where, for me, the start of this idea of, do I allow myself to make different choices? Do I allow myself to break with convention or tradition? Do I allow myself to become somebody that other people might not recognize, might not approve of, because I know it's the right thing for me?
Can I ask you a question around that concept of permission? You mentioned it towards the end of the story there. And I was reflecting on this earlier, and I thought, when you think about permission, the first thing for me that comes up is when you're a child, you ask permission to do something from your parents, they give it to you, and then you've got your blessing. It's okay, you can go do it. How do we as adults relate to this concept, permission? What is it? Why do we need permission? Who do we need permission from? And why do we struggle to give ourselves permission?
Yeah, I mean, and I, again, talk quite a lot about this in the book. It's like you spend your entire youth asking for permission to do the things you want to do. Permission is normally attached to desire, isn't it? In the most basic ways. May I speak? May I go to the bathroom? Can I go out with my friends on Friday night? It's accessing the things that you want normally require permission, or the things that you don't normally do, the things that are a little bit outside of the norm. I give the example of the permission slip to go on field trips. In America, we always had field trips, which was your one day a year where you left school and went off and did something exciting. And it was like, oh, we need a permission slip for this. So it's attached to things that fall outside the expected, the conventional, and the norm. As you move into adulthood, nobody sits you down and says, okay, now it's time for you to decide what you want. And in some ways, it wasn't needed in the past because there was almost a seamless transition from childhood and young adulthood into adulthood, where you slipped into a set of almost, pre-selected roles, pre-approved choices. Most people, went to the good school, got a good job, found the nice husband or wife, had the 2 kids. There was a story that you slipped into. And if you did that, you were told that you would, be rewarded with financial success and security, et cetera. And so most of us did the things we were expected to do as adults. We didn't have to look around for somebody to tell us whether it was okay if we were doing that. With the world changing so rapidly, with the number of paths available to us, the number of choices available to us, with the fact that the old sort of life story, the old success story has in many ways disintegrated, we are now faced with a situation where we have to be much more conscious givers of permission to ourselves, because there are 100 ways forward. None of them is right. Every one of them is right. And depending upon who you ask, you'll get a different opinion. So one of the things I talk about in the book is this need for agency in a disruptive world. And permission essentially is authorizing yourself to make your own choices. And, it isn't something that was historically as necessary as it is now. And I think part of the book is about getting super intentional, about engaging with your choices and understanding in a much more deliberate and intentional way than perhaps our parents had to. Why am I doing this? What do I want? And how do I see myself moving forward from here?
I resonate so much with that. And, especially this change, it was interesting the way you just explained that, how it used to work in the past. Those choices were almost laid out for you, or they were so limited in number that you didn't have to even ask yourself the question, what do I truly want, or take that risk to go outside of the norm. And we're seeing this. I see it in my own life. I see it with my friends. I see it with people that I coach with. Really this overwhelm of options and the complexity that we see in the world. And in a certain way, we can do anything or everything, but, making those decisions is so complex and so overwhelming. And so I see you with the book. I love this line, a playbook for navigating adulthood in the chaos of the 21st century. So tell us a little bit about the playbook. What are some of these, elements of the playbook that we need to be different today than, our parents' playbook?
So basically the 10 permissions are sort of taking 10 elements of the old playbook, if there was one, and sort of flipping them on their head and flipping the script, if you will, around what a good adult life looks like right now. I would say as a starting point, it's a sort of mindset, which I know is a very woolly word for a lot of people, but it's, how you see yourself moving into the world, your set of expectations for what it is going to look and feel like. And I think that that's actually critical, because as much as we know that the world looks nothing like it used to, we are deeply imprinted with an idea that we are supposed to move through it in the way that our parents did. So we absolutely know that nobody's holding on to a job for 40 years and getting a pension fund and a ring. And yet there's still a huge amount of pressure on young people to follow a fairly linear path into a well-paying job at a corporate. So there's this default script that's deeply imprinted on us about how we're supposed to operate. Attached to that is a degree of fear and shame and hesitation if you choose to do anything other than that still. What this is saying is that in the very first instance, get super aware of that script and the extent to which it still shapes your perception of what your options are. Because by becoming aware of it, you are then able to engage with it and decide how much of it is useful and how much of it isn't. So, a sort of mindset and worldview around how you move out into the world, your set of expectations for what that is going to look and feel like. Again, I believe a lot of people still believe that it's largely meant to be linear and seamless. Now, the world, there is nothing linear or seamless about the world right now. And yet we are still a little bit sort of afraid of making change, of encountering change, of being more fluid in our own worldview.
You touched on an important point there around fear, because it's interesting when I speak to people around this concept of linearity. A common response is, I know it's not linear, careers are not linear anymore. But where you see that belief system is really sitting deep is in the fears. If I don't take a promotion, am I making the right choice? If I'm going to make a complete career change, then that means I start from scratch, and that is an incorrect choice. So it's this concept around the fear of making wrong choices, but the world
Absolutely.
is not linear, and so therefore your career cannot be linear. I wanted to touch on a concept around a portfolio life or portfolio career, which I know that you touch on as well. Is a portfolio life then the antithesis of a linear life, or how do we understand that concept and the relevance of it in today's world?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's the antithesis. The portfolio to me is like preparedness. It is very intentionally, and intentional is a word that I overuse, intentionally gathering and creating a set of capabilities, skills, experiences, networks to continue to support you on your way forward, right? You're not just going, I'm learning one skill, I'm doing one job, I'm putting my head down, and I'm following that path because that's how I stay safe and secure. You're saying, okay, I know that if I've got to move through a space and I'm uncertain of where it's going or what I'm going to face along the way, I better have a backpack full of things that'll help me as I go. So to me, the mindset is one of creating a portfolio of capabilities and abilities and experiences that will help you to move your way forward. And I think the fear that is so endemic right now is because so much of our old sense of how we bought security in this world, we absolutely know is now empty, right? The corporates don't protect us. The big degree that I thought was going to ensure I'd have a job for the rest of my life, it doesn't protect me. And, I say in the book, this might scare the living daylights out of you or make you feel incredibly liberated, but you are your only security. It's you. And it's your ability to adapt and evolve and learn and grow over the course of your life that is your single greatest sort of security blanket. So I think this is about sort of boldly stepping into finding our way through a disruptive, but hugely sort of exciting and full of possibilities world with a portfolio of capabilities that allows us to move through it with as much confidence as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's about not finding that security and that way to things external to you, but really having it come from the inside out. And I guess that's where the permissions come in as well. Could you maybe share with us the 10 permissions that you've included in your book?
So the first one, which I'll come back around to because it kind of grounds the rest of them, and that's be willful. The willful child was the problematic child. The willful young person was the one who got into trouble. And the whole concept of that is that will and desire and agency were complications in the past. They got you into trouble. And now they're how you find your way. So, the single hardest thing for most humans is tapping into what they want and acting on it, trusting it and following it. So to me, it's got to start there. That sets you on the course. You will only go out finding your way with some sense of an evolving set of wants and desires. The second one is go astray. So that speaks to our linear life, which is, everything if you were a good person, if you kept doing the same thing over and over for your whole life, it was bad people or, kind of fringe people who stepped off their path, who took time out, who willfully chose something other than what they were doing. We were always told that was dangerous. And we were fed a sort of binary, pick your lane and stay in it. And that's how you stay safe and secure. The reality is that's a false binary. As you said, everybody knows it's not linear, but are we actively choosing and designing a non-linear life? So it's quite different to say, oh, I know I'll probably have to make change like several times in my life and almost waiting for it to happen by default versus, and this is where worldview comes in, saying, I absolutely envision a life that will be filled with change because that is how I learn, adapt, and grow. The third one is take it outside. So that's, again, the kind of old school playbook was this, your life was sat at a desk and it was 9 to 5 and you did that your whole life. And increasingly my generation sort of made that our life and everything outside of that became a nice to do. And I mean, we're seeing this all over the place and COVID helped accelerate a kind of reclaiming of time and a reclaiming of life beyond the work that's right in front of you. So it's urging moving out of a bubble, moving out of a very insular, isolated, my life is my work and my work is my life perspective, not only because you will be a happier, more fulfilled person, but because when you go out there, that's the right space for learning, growing, and adapting. The fourth one is experiment. So this is not something that responsible adults do. Responsible adults only make choices when the outcome is assured. So this is a big one around the fear that you raised earlier, which is I only do it if I absolutely know that it assures me security. In the old playbook, you made a couple of big choices. You made a couple of big bets. And part of what I say in the book is instead of seeing your life as 3 big bets, see it as 20 small ones. So take small chances and small risks to keep learning and growing. Try new things. Keep yourself in that space where you're actively trying things that are really preparing you to continually adapt, grow, and respond. And as you're doing that, the next one is to feel your way. So again, old playbook was incredibly sort of cognitive, logical. You made logical choices. It was an A plus B equals C world. It was an if-then world. If I get this degree, then I will have a job for life. This is not a rational world. And it is a world where if you are finding your way, you've really got to listen to more than just this. Because this is overworked and tired and confused and doesn't know true from false and right from wrong anymore. This is about really tapping into your instincts, your intuition, your body, your sensations, that whole concept. And I really do lean in a lot to the physical finding your way is I got to use everything. Because if I rely too heavily on this, I'm going to spend a lot of time feeling overwhelmed and anxious. So lighting up my own internal voice and trusting it and using it is absolutely critical in this world. The next one is forget about the future. The entire kind of 20th century worldview was built out around a future vision. And then you deduced every single other choice from that. So you had a 5-year plan and you had a big plan and you could see it clearly. And if you didn't, then there was a problem. You weren't ambitious enough, or you weren't smart enough, you weren't something enough. And this is a world that is much more, we literally do not know what the rest of this year is going to bring. We don't. And we probably never did, but now it is blatant and it is obvious that we are working within much shorter time frames. We cannot work in a deductive manner, and it relates to the next one, which is think small. It's sort of a small steps, inductive way of finding your way through things, which accepts the fact that you might not know. You might not know what your big sort of outcome is, and that's okay. And that's a huge message for me, because again, this is where the anxiety and insecurity and shame kicks in for so many people, especially young people who are like, I don't have the plan. I don't have the clear thing. And I talk about it more in the book, but it's about managing big intentions. So have a big idea about what it is you want to do, or a general thought about where it is you want to go, and marry that with small attention. So finding your way forward step by step and accepting that that's okay. The next one is travel light. Security used to be assets that you surrounded yourself with to protect you. And now we're at a point where a lot of people can't afford those assets. They might not want those assets, or they're at a stage where they might want to be more fluid with what it is that they have, what it is that they want. And again, it's kind of saying that's okay, because this is one where we still are deeply imprinted with the idea that success looks like having a certain number of things and having ever more. And this is a big one, like for a lot of my 50-year-old entrepreneurs who want to take a big risk in their lives, but what if it means that I'm not making as much money? That's a drop in status. And the reality that worldview limited your ability to be adaptive and responsive and make change, because what you did then was try to protect that path forward and those assets. So it's really about saying, carry only what you can at any given point in your life and be prepared to put it down if it doesn't suit you anymore. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine. That is what success can look like in this day and age. The next one is look for trouble. Back to troublemakers. I couldn't completely get away
Couldn't
from
help
trouble.
yourself. No.
I couldn't. I'm sorry. Because if there's anything that the successful adult was supposed to do, it was avoid trouble, right? So this is not about sort of going and looking for things, because I think we've got plenty of fighting going on in the world, but look for things that are troubling the world. Look for things that trouble you. Look for problems. Look for challenges. Be willing to go and get involved and decide what matters to you and what means something to you. Because again, the kind of corporatist view of adulthood is that your only reason for being is to just continually augment your own status and salary. A lot of people at a young age start to push to the side the voice in their head that maybe cares about something or is interested in something, or stays away from thornier problems because they don't see that it's of value to them. I describe these last two as where the 10 permissions start to shape out into the world, which is, have a sense of meaning and stake in something bigger than you. And the last one is make believe. So it's believe that you can make things and make things that you believe in. It is all over the place now. We're in a creator's economy, and most people then immediately think of this kind of thing. So people making podcasts who 10 years ago would never thought about making a podcast. The podcast is the perfect example of this. Social and digital media are the most obvious sort of examples of us moving into that. But to my mind, it goes well beyond that. It's again, a view of yourself as creator, which is not artistic. It is a person who has an ability to bring new things into the world. And the old worldview said that was just for a few people. That was for creatives. They were fancy people, and we didn't do that. We just did our job and pushed papers around or wrote documents. But this is sort of liberating that little part in yourself that brings a little bit more of your own flair, your own perspective, your own desires into the world, and gets involved in making new things, whether that's in a corporate setting or a, creative setting. The world is looking for people to create newness, and AI is certainly challenging us to accelerate this human capability to create. These be willful and make believe are like bookends, if you will, of these 10 permissions, because they also both go back to these very foundational human abilities, desire and create, our ability to generate. These are things that as children we use all the time. We are hugely willful and hugely creative. This is not anything new for us as humans. It's giving yourself permission to see these things as central to your thriving as an adult. And those were things that, the old playbook didn't require or allow. And a lot of this people already know. And that's why permission is so important, because it's like going, it's okay. It's good. Go. You're going to be okay. Those are the 10 permissions.
Super, super powerful. And it was so interesting to watch my reaction as you were talking, because every permission you state, I go, oh shit. And then as you talk through it, I go, okay, I get it. Yes, it makes sense. I see this, how this applies in my life. And then I don't even know if you noticed it, but then at the end of each one, you say, but that's okay. And then that just brings the calmness over me. Yeah, this is different. This is unexpected, but it makes sense. It's a better way to respond and actually be within this world and the reality that we're living in. And that is okay. And collectively, we have to follow this playbook and rewrite the way that things are done.
Yeah, there's a deep, very visceral reaction. I mean, and they are challenging our perception on a very deep level of who we're supposed to be and what we're allowed to do. And obviously that's very intentional. And every single person will have their own interpretation and application of those. And part of the whole point of the book, and when you buy the book, you will get a kind of little starter kit to go along with it, I am not talking about blowing up your life in the first instance. Okay. This is about activating a set of, sort of sensibility and awareness of what you think your choices are, what you think good choices are, what you think the choices are that you're allowed to make, what you are actually allowed to make. And when you asked earlier, as an adult, who do you have to ask permission from? And the simple answer is yourself. I mean, you're 9 times out of 10, it's you. Now, there are certain cases, of course, where there is a boss. If it's a work-related thing, that's kind of, if somebody is in a position of control over you, if somebody, is in some ways has power over you, then of course there are ways in which you will need permission to do certain things. But the very first one, and this comes back to my whole helping people make change, is that 9 times out of 10, it's you and your own stories and your own perceptions of self that keep you from even trying or even thinking of a different way forward. So, a lot of this is our relationship with ourselves and the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we've inherited, some of which we're aware of, a lot of which we aren't, and becoming increasingly aware of whether they still serve us and whether we are allowed to play with them, to throw them out, to lovingly embellish them for a new time, because it's a very, very, very different world. The only way the fear is alleviated is when you start to trust in yourself a little bit more.
I wanted to ask a question around leadership, because you mentioned that dynamic there if you're working for a boss. And I know that you work with leaders. I work with women in leadership as well. What is the kind of leadership that we need right now? And if you are a woman in leadership, how do you apply these permissions to how you lead and empowering others in your organization to be able to give themselves this permission?
I'm currently applying these 10 permissions in a women in leadership context. Somebody asked me to come and give a talk about the 10 permissions to a group of women on Women's Day here. And the response to it was so overwhelming. The reality is that despite progress, if we want to talk about default stories holding us back, I think there is a default story around leadership that the most effective brand of leadership remains a male, a masculine coded form of leadership remains in our minds, in our set of expectations, still what good leadership looks like. So I have over the past year worked with women around this idea of authority to lead, because what we are seeing right now is a world where what would be perhaps the masculine coded directive, hierarchical, long-term visions and organizing people to pursue those. Again, we absolutely know that vision of leadership, that model of leadership is giving way to another form of leadership or a complementary set of leadership skill sets, which we have coded as soft, that are more relational, that have more to do with managing people and relationships and individuals, that, as I describe, in this fluid world where we're not working on, in these fixed sets of workplaces, where people are moving around more, where issues are changing, where problems are changing, we need a different set of skill sets to manage those. And we know that women possess those skills. We are very sort of, as I say, we have owned or honed our soft skills over a course of a lifetime of trying to sort of fit in to boardrooms, to sales pitches, to all the places that we continue to walk into and feel like we need permission to be there. So that's kind of the bold statement that I'm going to put out, is that I believe that a lot of women, consciously, unconsciously, still are made to feel that they are there because they've been allowed to be there by male stakeholders. And they therefore, once they get there, start to operate within this very narrower space of how they're supposed to show up as most acceptable. And it's an absolutely losing game. They burn out, they get tired, they get sick of it. The mental load of always trying to not be too much, but not be too little, to figure out how to walk in the room and make sure that you look okay. Am I pretty enough, but not so pretty that I'll be distracting? Am I assertive enough that they'll respect me because I'm constantly trying to earn respect, but also not aggressive because they don't like that? So the space in which women feel they're allowed to operate is unbelievably narrow and exhausting, because the mental load required to always have to be acceptable is overwhelming. And it's why, one of the reasons why women leave corporate and go and start their own thing in droves, because they get tired of having to navigate this space that really doesn't feel like it was ever set up for them to flourish. It was allowing them in and telling them it's fine if you do your work, that's fine. If you're competent, that's fine. But actually, to work your way up to have one of the 3 seats at the vaunted table is a poison chalice, because once you get there, you, again, are having to navigate a set of expectations and the constant fear that you'll be tipping over into too much. And these are the conversations that I've been having with women for over a year now around owning your authority to lead, owning the fact that you are what good looks like. If we want to take the language of a playbook, the old leadership playbook, it's time to throw it out. It doesn't work anymore. Leadership looks very different. And this is a wonderful moment for women to own the fact that we can step in with and own our authority and not burn ourselves out and stay small by kind of always feeling like we need permission to be there.
I work with one on this concept of being a powerful leader, where it's a leader that's not only effective, but that it can do it sustainably in the long run. It starts with being capable. And as you rightly say, there is always things that we can work on to be more capable, but that is kind of one element of it. Another one is being authentic and leading from within and who you truly are and the strengths that you bring. And the other piece is around being confident, but in that sense that you and the way that you lead is as valid as any other model of leadership. Your model of leading and what you intuitively feel is right and the impact that you want to have is as valid, and having the confidence in that. I know that still in workplaces, the culture is not always such that that is appreciated, but I think that is really where we need to go.
If I can say this, because I think this is a really important thing. And I see it with my kids at school. So girls are overwhelmingly the high achievers at school. I mean, they're kicking boys' butts all over the world at achievement. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is that what grooms you for achievement does not groom you for authority. So you have a bunch of high achievers, right? They meet the external metrics to a T. They do everything that everybody wants them to do. They are looking outwards all the time for how to get the next A, how to be the, prefect or the head of that committee. They are high achievers. They, continue that pathway. They get into a world of work that is still coded largely as male, but at which point your authority, what you believe you are allowed to do and say and be, which is not always fitting within the box of the metrics, gets challenged. They walk into these systems that are receiving them as capable workers, right? But are they receiving them as authoritative leaders who will have opinions that are different from everybody else, who might be difficult, who might be all sorts of things that does not fit within that high achiever category, which is tell me what to do and I'll do it. I'll stay up all night working on that great proposal. So they burn themselves out in this kind of achiever mindset. And yet we sit there and look at the ranks of leadership are not filled with those people, because to get there requires you to have difficult conversations, to make demands, to stand in front of rooms of people who might disagree with you. And those are not things that if you've spent your whole life trying to get A's, you know how to do. So we need to start to prepare young people across the board, male, female, because in your same breath, you can have a conversation about a masculinity crisis right now. So understanding authority is not having power over somebody, but standing in your own power, showing up as your fullest expression of self and accepting what comes as a consequence. We need to prepare all sorts of young people for owning their own agency and authority much earlier. So, for me, these are the spaces that we need to work in right now around women's leadership and around working with women. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing and what you just said, it's also that element of getting comfortable with the fact that it's most probably going to feel uncomfortable. And that is, just when you were speaking about that high achieving, there's no gold stars in the world or in corporate. When you're doing the right thing and you're doing the right thing for yourself, that can very often feel highly uncomfortable, which we take as a signal that we might be doing something wrong. But I think it's getting that comfortable with that.
And that takes us back to troublemakers, because that was all about, and it's true with everything, Nicolette, it's like you have to get into those spaces and those places for yourself to feel uncomfortable. And it doesn't have to be hard, but it's just moving into those moments where you aren't just, defaulting to the comfort of what's always been or what you've always done or what feels safe. And I guess the point of the book is to say, we don't even have the luxury to do that anymore. It really isn't an option, but we've got to prepare ourselves much more deliberately to move out into this world, because a lot of the, loneliness, the anxiety, the burnout, the prescription drugs, the this, the that, it's medicating and against the chaos. And so that's why the subtitle of the book was so important to me, because it's like, there's no going back. And that might feel sad, but it's real. And so how do we prepare ourselves to move out into this? Because I think when we do, we'll actually find that there's so much more space for a fulfilling life and for a lot of things that can help us to really connect much more to ourselves than there used to be. But to do that is going to require us navigating it very, very differently.
So thanks so much, Jillian. This was a super powerful and a really, I took so much from this conversation. It feels like a very practical, although challenging and confronting playbook for today's world. And I look so much forward to reading the book. If people want to get in touch with you, they want to learn about your work, or they want to pre-order the book, where do they go?
My website, www.10permissions.com, is a great place. There are little buttons there to pre-order the book. I have a WhatsApp group where I am currently just sort of playing around, taking my own advice and experimenting with permissions conversations. Sign up for that too. So that's a great place. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so they can find me there. But the website is probably the best first place to start.
Right. We'll make sure to share that in the description and in the comments. Thanks so much, Jillian. Appreciate you. Thank you for this powerful conversation.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you for having me and for being a part of the When I Grow Up community. It's a great resource that you're offering to people.
Thanks so much.